Hey guys! Tonight, we're stepping quietly inside one of the most uncomfortable places in the medieval world. The castle. Today, castles look beautiful in movies and paintings. Massive stone walls. Glowing candlelight. Grand royal feasts. Elegant kings and queens. But the reality smelled very different. Behind those enormous wooden doors was a world filled with smoke, sweat, sewage, mold, wet straw, rotting food, dirty clothing, and overflowing toilets. Even the richest nobles in Europe often lived surrounded by smells that would make most modern people feel sick within minutes, long before plumbing, deodorant, proper bathing, or modern sanitation. Medieval castles trapped thousands of unpleasant odors inside cold stone walls where fresh air barely moved. Servants emptied chamber pots out windows. Animals wandered through castle courtyards. Food spoiled quickly. And enormous fireplaces filled rooms with smoke that clung to clothes, furniture, and skin. At night, crowded sleeping halls became hot, noisy, and deeply uncomfortable. While fleas, rats, and lice thrived in dark corners throughout the castle. But before we quietly wander through tonight's foul-smelling medieval fortress, take a moment to like the video, subscribe if you enjoy relaxing history content, and let me know down in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Now, lower the lights, get comfortable, and let's slowly step inside the filthy and surprisingly miserable world of medieval castles. The rain had already begun before sunset. Far across the dark countryside, beyond muddy roads and sleeping farms, a giant medieval castle stood against the grey evening sky like an exhausted stone mountain. Its towers disappeared into drifting mist. Torch flames flickered weakly beside the gate. And somewhere high above the walls, ravens shifted quietly in the cold wind. At first glance, the fortress seemed magnificent. Safe. Powerful. A place of royal comfort. But as travelers approached the castle gates, the illusion slowly began to disappear. The smell reached them first, not one smell, but layers of them. Heavy smoke from damp firewood. Wet animal fur. Rotting vegetables. Human sweat trapped inside wool clothing. Stagnant water sitting in barrels for too long. Horse manure crushed into the mud beneath thousands of boots. And beneath all of it, a faint sewage odor drifting from hidden corners of the castle walls. The deeper one traveled into the castle grounds, the stronger the air became. Servants hurried across the courtyard carrying buckets of scraps toward feeding pits. Dogs wandered between puddles searching for bones. Stable boys pushed straw soaked with animal waste into steaming piles beside the walls. Even the rain could not fully wash the smell away. Instead, the moisture seemed to trap the odors low against the earth. Inside the castle, conditions grew even worse. Most medieval castles were designed for defense, not comfort. Their thick stone walls blocked sunlight. Their narrow windows allowed little fresh air inside. And during winter, doors and shutters often remained tightly closed to preserve heat. Unfortunately, this trapped every smell indoors. Smoke from giant fireplaces rolled along the ceilings of crowded halls. Grease from cooking fires coated wooden beams black over time. Wet cloaks steamed beside flames after long rides through rainstorms. And beneath tables covered with noble feasts, rushes scattered across the floor quietly absorbed spilled wine, food scraps, mud, and human waste for weeks or even months. People in the medieval world understood bad smells differently than modern society. Many believed foul odors themselves caused illness. Rotting air was feared almost like a living curse. But despite these fears, Castles constantly produced the very smells people dreaded. Imagine sleeping inside one of these halls. Dozens of people breathing heavily through the night. Candles melting slowly beside beds. Sweaty wool blankets. Smoke drifting from dying fires. Boots drying near the walls. And somewhere in the darkness, rats scratching quietly beneath the floorboards. Even kings and queens could not escape these conditions. Royal chambers might contain richer fabrics or private fireplaces, but they still existed inside the same damp stone fortress. Perfumes helped only briefly. Fresh herbs scattered on floors faded quickly. And scented oils could never fully overpower the deeper smells hidden inside the castle itself. The castle was almost alive. Breathing slowly. Holding heat, moisture, smoke. An odor inside its endless stone corridors. Visitors often noticed how the smell clung to them long after leaving. Their hair carried smoke. Their cloaks absorbed dampness. Even their skin seemed marked by the heavy air of the fortress, yet for the people living there, this world became normal. Children grew up surrounded by these smells. Servants worked entire lifetimes inside them. Nobles dined beside them. And soldiers slept through them night after night. The medieval castle was not the clean royal fantasy modern imagination often creates. It was crowded, cold, dark, and deeply uncomfortable. Still, behind those smoky corridors and foul-smelling halls, life continued. Feasts were celebrated. Secrets were whispered. Fires crackled through long winter nights. And thousands of people accepted conditions that would feel unbearable today, because for medieval society, the castle represented power, protection, survival, even if it smelled terrible. And as the rain continues tapping softly against the stone walls tonight, we quietly move deeper into the fortress. Past the torchlit corridors. Past the crowded servants. Toward the hidden realities behind medieval luxury itself. Morning arrived slowly inside the castle, not with silence, but with echoes, wooden doors creaking open, distant footsteps crossing stone corridors, horses snorting in the stables below, servants whispering beside smoky kitchens before sunrise, and somewhere deep inside the fortress, the heavy sound of water buckets being dragged across damp floors. From the outside, medieval castles appeared magnificent. Visitors imagined silk curtains, golden goblets, roasted feasts, and elegant royal comfort hidden behind towering walls. But once the castle fully awakened, another reality quietly revealed itself. Luxury in the medieval world often existed beside dirt, beside smoke, beside illness, and beside smells that no expensive tapestry could truly hide. As dawn light slipped weakly through narrow windows, servants hurried through the great hall collecting the remains of last night's feast. Half-chewed bread lay beneath tables, greasy bones rested inside wooden bowls, wine soaked into rushes spread across the floor, and spilled stew had already begun souring in the warmth near the fireplaces. The hall smelled stale, heavy, almost wet. Yet within only a few hours, nobles would return and continue dining there as though nothing had happened. Medieval castles were designed to impress visitors with wealth and power. Massive tapestries covered cold walls, silver plates gleamed in candlelight. Musicians performed beside roaring fires, but hidden behind this performance of royal elegance was an enormous army of exhausted servants struggling constantly against filth. Beneath every luxurious feast existed piles of rotting scraps. Behind every decorated chamber stood servants emptying waste buckets, and beneath expensive clothing hid layers of sweat trapped inside thick fabric rarely washed properly. Even the air inside noble chambers carried strange mixtures of scents: burning beeswax, wet fur cloaks, perfume oils, smoke, mold, and the faint odor of unwashed bedding lingering quietly underneath everything else. Stone castles trap moisture easily. Condensation gathered along walls during cold mornings, heavy curtains absorbed damp air, wooden furniture slowly collected mildew, and because sunlight barely reached many rooms, unpleasant smells often settled permanently into the building itself. The richer the castle became, the more complicated the problem grew. Large castles housed hundreds of people, nobles, servants, cooks, guards, stable workers, blacksmiths, messengers, guests, priests, children, animals, all living together inside enclosed walls where cleanliness remained difficult and constant waste never truly disappeared. One corridor might display beautiful painted shields and polished armor, the next might contain leaking barrels, muddy boots, spoiled grain sacks, or laundry hanging. Beside chamber pots, the contrast between appearance and reality existed everywhere. A noblewoman might wear an elegant velvet gown embroidered with gold thread, but beneath the heavy layers of fabric, the clothing often carried the scent of smoke and body odor gathered over weeks. Perfume helped briefly, flowers sewn into sleeves offered temporary freshness, still, the smells always returned. Even royal furniture carried hidden discomfort. Mattresses stuffed with straw slowly absorbed sweat and moisture, blankets trapped fleas, wooden tables held grease inside tiny cracks, and enormous decorative carpets quietly collected dust, ash, crumbs, and animal hair year after year. Medieval luxury looked impressive in candlelight, but it rarely felt truly clean. In the kitchens below, conditions became harsher still. The heat from giant fires mixed with steam from boiling pots, fish scales covered cutting boards, animal blood stained the floor. Servants worked shoulder to shoulder through thick smoke while scraps piled in corners waiting to be removed. The castle depended entirely on constant labor, without servants endlessly cleaning, carrying, burning, washing, scraping, and hauling waste outside the walls. Conditions would become unbearable within days, and sometimes they nearly did. During harsh winters, garbage removal slowed, rain flooded storage areas, food spoiled faster than expected, rats multiplied, and crowded halls filled with even stronger odors as windows remained shut against freezing winds. Yet despite everything, medieval nobles still considered castles symbols of refinement. A powerful lord sitting beneath candlelight in a richly decorated hall likely saw luxury where modern visitors would notice discomfort almost immediately. Because expectations were different, most people in medieval Europe lived surrounded by smells every day. Animals lived nearby, roads filled with mud and waste, bathing remained uncommon, and cities themselves often smelled overwhelming. Compared to peasant villages or crowded towns, castles still represented status and protection, but beneath the glitter of goblets and embroidered banners, the castle remained deeply human, messy, exhausting, and impossible to keep truly clean. Late that evening, as fires dimmed across the fortress, servants quietly replaced rushes on portions of the great hall floor. Fresh straw covered the filth beneath for another few days, candles flickered lower. Footsteps faded, and the smell of smoke slowly settled once more into the ancient stone walls. Somewhere high above the courtyard, a noble family prepared for sleep inside chambers decorated with expensive fabrics, yet even there, hidden beneath perfumes and warm blankets, the castle's unpleasant reality still lingered softly in the air. And tomorrow morning, the cycle would quietly begin again, as we continue wandering deeper through this uneasy fortress tonight. Another unpleasant detail waits behind the next corridor, the medieval solution to one of humanity's oldest problems, the toilet. Night settled heavily over the castle. The great hall had finally grown quiet. The fires burned lower now, glowing softly beneath thick clouds of drifting smoke. servants moved silently through dark corridors carrying candles that trembled with every cold draught sneaking through the stone walls. Most of the castle slept, but hidden behind curtains, wooden doors, and narrow staircases. Another part of castle life quietly continued through the night, the unpleasant business of waste. In the modern world, bathrooms disappear politely behind clean walls and flowing water, but inside a medieval castle, there was no true escape from human waste, no plumbing, no fresh-smelling bathrooms. No underground sewer systems carrying odors far away. Everything remained close, very close, throughout the fortress. Chamber pots waited beneath beds, beside chairs, underneath staircases, and inside private sleeping chambers, simple containers made from clay, wood, or metal, and every single morning somebody had to empty them. In wealthy castles, nobles often used decorated chamber pots hidden beneath embroidered cloths or placed discreetly behind furniture. Some were polished beautifully, some even carried carved designs or metal handles, but no amount of decoration could hide their purpose. During freezing winter nights, few people wanted to leave warm rooms to search for distant toilets in dark corridors. So chamber pots became essential. Kings used them, queens used them, children, guards, priests, servants. Everyone relied on them, and inside crowded castles housing hundreds of people, the smell slowly became unavoidable. Imagine a narrow sleeping chamber lit only by fading candlelight, heavy wool blankets, cold damp air pressing against stone walls, smoke drifting beneath the ceiling from nearby fireplaces, and beside the bed an overflowing chamber pot waiting until morning. The smell lingered through the night, especially during winter, when shutters stayed tightly closed against snow and icy winds. Some servants carried waste outside before sunrise, others emptied chamber pots into castle latrines built into the walls themselves. These early toilets were called gardrobes. From the outside, castles appeared solid and elegant, but hidden within many walls were narrow stone toilet shafts dropping waste directly downward into pits, moats, or open ground below. Sometimes the waste simply collected at the base of the castle walls, sometimes rain washed portions away, and sometimes it did not. Travelers approaching certain castles often noticed the smell long before reaching the gates. Especially during warmer months, inside the gardrobes, conditions could feel deeply unpleasant. Small stone seats rested above dark vertical tunnels disappearing into shadow. Cold drafts rose constantly from below. Flies gathered during summer, and the stone surfaces remained damp nearly all year. Privacy barely existed. Many castle bathrooms were little more than narrow alcoves built into shared corridors. Servants and nobles alike often endured the same uncomfortable conditions. At night, carrying candles through silent hallways toward these toilets could feel unsettling. The castle groaned softly in darkness, wind whistled through arrow slits, footsteps echoed strangely through empty passages. And somewhere beneath the fortress, unseen waste slowly accumulated. The smell became strongest during sieges. When castles sealed their gates against enemies, hundreds of additional soldiers crowded inside. Food supplies shrank, fresh water became limited, and waste built up faster than servants could remove it. Some castles developed terrible sanitation problems during long sieges, overflowing latrines, contaminated water, rotting refuse trapped inside defensive walls. Disease spread easily in such conditions, but even during peaceful years, keeping castle bathrooms clean remained nearly impossible. Servants worked endlessly carrying buckets, scrubbing stone seats, spreading herbs, burning incense, and attempting to reduce odors that constantly returned. Certain herbs like lavender, rosemary, and mint were scattered near noble chambers to soften unpleasant smells. But these fragrances faded quickly against the heavier reality beneath them. Many medieval people accepted these conditions simply because they had never experienced anything different. Human waste existed openly throughout daily life, roads smelled foul, cities dumped refuse into streets. Animals wandered everywhere. Compared to crowded towns outside the walls, castles sometimes seemed cleaner by comparison. Still, visitors occasionally recorded shock at the overwhelming odors hidden inside great fortresses, especially foreigners unused to local conditions. One uncomfortable truth followed medieval castles everywhere: the higher the population inside the walls, the worse sanitation became, and castles were rarely empty. Late tonight, deep beneath the sleeping chambers, a servant quietly descends a narrow spiral staircase carrying 2 heavy buckets. Only torchlight guides his path. His boots scrape against damp stone steps worn smooth by generations before him. The smell grows stronger with every level downward. Cold air rises from unseen tunnels. Water drips slowly somewhere in darkness, and far above, hidden behind tapestries and royal banners, nobles sleep peacefully while servants continue the unpleasant work keeping the castle barely livable. The servant reaches a small outer door near the base of the wall. Rain falls softly. Outside, without speaking, he empties the waste into a ditch already overflowing beside the fortress. Then he turns quietly back toward the castle. Tomorrow morning, the chamber pots will fill again. The guardrobes will remain cold and foul-smelling, and life inside the medieval fortress will continue exactly as before, because inside these enormous stone castles, discomfort was not unusual. It was simply part of everyday life. And as our candlelight flickers deeper into the sleeping fortress tonight, another unpleasant reality quietly waits nearby: the castle toilets themselves. The deeper one traveled into a medieval castle, the stranger the fortress became. Behind grand halls and decorated chambers existed narrow passageways most guests rarely noticed. Tiny staircases hidden inside thick walls, low wooden doors disappearing into shadow, cold corridors where torchlight barely reached the floor, and somewhere along these dark passages, the castle toilets waited, silent, damp, and deeply unpleasant. By modern standards, medieval castle bathrooms hardly seemed like bathrooms at all. There were no clean tiles, no flowing water, no pipes hidden safely underground. Instead, most castles relied on simple stone openings built into the walls themselves. These guardrobes often projected slightly outward from the castle so waste could fall directly below. From outside, visitors sometimes noticed narrow vertical stains running beneath certain windows high along the stone walls. Those marks revealed exactly where the toilets were located, and unfortunately, the smell rarely stayed hidden. During calm weather, foul air drifted upward through the shafts and back into the castle itself. In summer heat, the odor grew even stronger, and during heavy rain, moisture mixed with years of waste trapped below the walls. The result could become unbearable. Inside the guardrobes, conditions remained cold throughout nearly every season. Stone seats felt icy during winter mornings. Wind howled upward through the openings beneath them, and the darkness below seemed endless. Some toilets dropped directly into moats, others emptied into pits dug beside the fortress foundations. A few castles built primitive drainage channels, but these systems clogged easily and rarely solved the deeper sanitation problems. Flies gathered constantly during warm months. Rats sometimes climbed upward through the shafts searching for scraps, and servants assigned to clean these spaces endured some of the most miserable jobs inside the castle. Imagine entering one late at night. A single candle flickers weakly in your hand. The corridor behind you feels silent except for distant footsteps echoing somewhere far away. Cold damp air presses against the walls, then the smell reaches you. Sharp, rotting, heavy. Enough to taste. Even nobles dreaded using certain castle toilets after dark. Many guardrobes lacked proper doors. Some offered only cloth curtains for privacy. Others sat directly beside shared hallways where guards, servants, and guests passed constantly. Privacy inside medieval castles was surprisingly rare. Life happened collectively. People slept together, dined together, worked together, and often. Even bathroom spaces remained semi-public. In larger castles, rows of connected toilets sometimes lined shared chambers above the outer walls. The sounds alone could make the experience uncomfortable enough, but the smells lingered. Worst of all, medieval builders occasionally attempted clever solutions. Some guardrobes faced windy sides of the castle where air currents might carry odors away. Others were positioned above rivers or cliffs to remove waste more effectively, yet nature rarely cooperated perfectly. Wind changed direction, rain flooded waste pits, frozen winters slowed decomposition, and over time, layers of filth accumulated around the fortress itself. The castle became trapped inside its own waste. At night, servants carried ash, lime, herbs, and burning incense into toilet chambers trying to soften the smell: lavender, juniper, rosemary. But these pleasant scents only floated briefly through the heavier odor beneath them. Sometimes tapestries hung near toilet corridors absorbed the foul air for years. Wooden beams darkened with moisture. Stone walls remained permanently stained. Even expensive royal castles struggled constantly against sanitation problems no amount of wealth could fully erase. Worst of all were the accidents. Old wooden toilet seats occasionally cracked. Drainage tunnels collapsed, and in some castles, servants cleaning the waste pits below faced deadly gases or dangerous infections. Historians have even discovered evidence of parasites surviving inside castle latrines for centuries, tiny invisible reminders of how unhealthy these environments truly were. Yet medieval people adapted because they had little alternative. The castle represented protection from war, bandits, hunger, and harsh winters. People tolerated discomfort because survival mattered more than comfort. Still, the unpleasant reality shaped daily life constantly. Nobles avoided certain corridors during summer heat. Servants rushed quickly through toilet chambers while holding herbs beneath their noses, and guests unfamiliar with castle life often remembered the smell long after leaving. Even tonight, inside this sleeping fortress, the toilets remain active. A guard descends quietly from the walls after midnight. His boots echo softly through the corridor. He carries a small lantern beside him, while cold wind slips beneath the doors. Outside, rain taps gently against the stone towers. Inside the guardrobe chamber, the flame flickers weakly. The air feels damp and stale. Far below the narrow shaft, unseen water drips into darkness. For a moment, the castle feels ancient beyond imagination. Not glamorous, not noble, only old, a giant stone machine struggling endlessly to contain the messy realities of human life. The guard leaves quickly. The candlelight disappears down the corridor, and once again, the toilet chamber falls silent except for the whispering wind. Moving slowly through the walls, tomorrow morning, servants will clean what they can. Fresh rushes may cover nearby floors. Perfume oils may fill noble chambers upstairs, but nothing will truly remove the deeper smells trapped inside the fortress itself. Because medieval castles were never as clean or elegant as modern legends pretend, behind every royal feast and glowing torchlit banquet, unpleasant realities waited only a few steps away, and deeper inside the castle tonight. Another invisible discomfort spreads quietly through the halls: smoke. Long before sunrise touched the castle towers, the fires were already awake. Deep within the fortress, servants moved quietly through darkness carrying bundles of wood beneath their arms. Their footsteps echoed softly across cold stone floors while most of the castle still slept beneath heavy blankets and drifting smoke. The fireplaces could never fully die, not in winter, not inside a medieval castle. Without constant fire, the stone fortress became unbearably cold. The walls trapped moisture. The floors froze beneath bare feet. An icy wind slipped through cracks in shutters and narrow arrow slits high above the courtyards. so the fires burned endlessly, day after day, night after night, and with them came another problem medieval castles could never escape: smoke. At first glance, the giant fireplaces seemed magnificent. Massive stone hearths towered beneath high ceilings large enough for servants to stand inside while cooking meals. Logs crackled beneath iron pots. Orange light flickered against banners hanging from the walls. In paintings and films, these fires often appear warm and comforting. But the reality felt very different: medieval fireplaces were inefficient. Many chimneys failed to carry smoke outside properly. Wind pushed soot back into rooms. Wetwood burned badly, and enormous halls often filled with thick haze that lingered for hours beneath the ceilings. Inside crowded castles, smoke became part of everyday life. It settled into clothing, into blankets, into hair and skin. Even expensive royal fabrics slowly absorbed the smell of burning wood over time. In the great hall, servants rubbed soot from tables every morning only for fresh smoke to coat them again by evening. Candles added even more fumes to the air. Hundreds of small flames flickered constantly throughout the fortress: beeswax candles for the wealthy, cheaper tallow candles for servants and guards. The tallow version smelled especially unpleasant. Made from animal fat, they released greasy smoke and strange odors while burning. Together, fireplaces and candles created a permanent smoky atmosphere inside many castles. Visitors sometimes described the air as cloudy, heavy, difficult to breathe. Imagine entering the Great Hall. During winter, outside, snow falls silently beyond the walls. Inside, enormous fires roar beneath dark wooden beams blackened by decades of soot. The room feels warm near the hearths, but colder farther away where damp air still clings to the stone. Smoke drifts slowly overhead like fog trapped indoors. Your eye stings slightly. Your clothes immediately begin absorbing the smell, and everywhere around you, people continue living as though this discomfort barely matters. Children sleep beside fireplaces. Servants cook through the smoke for hours. Nobles dine while soot floats invisibly through candlelight. The castle breathed smoke constantly. Smaller chambers faced their own problems. Private fireplaces often lacked proper ventilation. Bedrooms became stuffy during cold nights when shutters stayed closed tightly against freezing wind. Some people awoke coughing. Others suffered sore eyes or headaches after long winters inside heavily smoked rooms. Yet the fires remained necessary. Without them, survival itself became dangerous. Wet clothing needed drying, food required cooking, water had to be heated, and stone castles trapped cold almost as effectively as they trapped odor. The smoke reached every level of castle life. Kitchen workers developed dark stains on their hands and faces from years beside the hearths. Ceilings turned black above cooking fires. Tapestries slowly darkened with soot. Even royal chapels sometimes smelled faintly of smoke during winter services. At night, the haze looked almost ghostly. Torchlight shimmered weakly through drifting gray clouds beneath the ceilings. Shadows stretched strangely across walls. The fortress felt ancient, half asleep, buried beneath warmth and smoke together. And then there were the accidents. Chimney fires could spread rapidly through wooden sections of the castle. Sparks escaped from hearths onto rush-covered floors. Heavy smoke occasionally suffocated people sleeping too close to poorly ventilated fires. The danger never disappeared completely. Still, medieval people associated fire with safety, with comfort, with life itself. During long freezing winters, a castle without fire felt empty and deadly. Tonight, as darkness settles across the fortress once more, servants kneel beside the great hearth adding fresh logs before sleep. The flames rise slowly. Orange light dances across tired faces. Smoke curls upward toward rafters already blackened from generations of burning fires. Nearby, a nobleman dozes quietly in his chair wrapped beneath heavy wool blankets while faint coughing echoes. Somewhere deeper in the hall, outside, cold wind moves across the towers. But inside the castle, warmth and smoke remained trapped together within the ancient stone walls, hour after hour, night after night. Year after year, and slowly, the smell of fire becomes part of the castle itself, part of its furniture, its corridors, its people. Even tomorrow morning, long after the fires shrink into glowing ash, the scent will still linger across every room inside the fortress, because medieval castles did not smell clean, they smelled alive: smoke, sweat, dampness, ash, all blending together beneath flickering candlelight while the world outside slept beneath snow and darkness. And somewhere below these smoky halls, tonight, another source of unpleasant odor quietly waits: the kitchens. Far below the noble chambers, beneath the smoky halls and torchlit corridors, the castle kitchens never truly slept. Even in the middle of the night, faint movement continued near the great hearths. A servant stirred dying embers with an iron rod, another carried sacks of onions through dark passageways lit only by candlelight. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped steadily into stone basins while rats searched quietly beneath wooden shelves. The kitchens were the beating heart of the medieval castle, and they smelled terrible. At sunrise, the work began again. Cooks hurried through clouds of smoke preparing meals for hundreds of people living inside the fortress walls. Bread ovens glowed with heat, knives struck wooden tables in steady rhythm, large iron pots simmered over open fires while servants carried barrels of salted meat across slippery floors already stained from years of cooking. The air felt thick, heavy with steam, grease, ash, sweat, and something slowly spoiling underneath it all. Because preserving food inside a medieval castle was incredibly difficult, there were no refrigerators, no sealed containers, no modern understanding of bacteria or contamination. Everything depended on salt, smoke, drying, or cold weather, and when these methods failed, the smell spread quickly, especially during warmer seasons. Castle kitchens stored enormous quantities of food. Fish packed in salt barrels, sides of beef hanging from hooks, cheese aging in damp storage rooms, vegetables piled in dark cellars beneath the fortress. But many of these supplies spoiled faster than expected. Moisture crept into grain sacks, rats chewed through storage barrels, flies gathered around exposed meat, and during summer heat, rot arrived with frightening speed. Servants constantly inspected supplies, trying to salvage what they could before entire stores became unusable. Sometimes spoiled portions were simply cut away. Other times, cooks masked unpleasant flavors with heavy spices or thick stews. Strong herbs helped hide the taste, but they could not fully hide the smell. Imagine entering the kitchen during midday. The heat hits first. Massive fireplaces roar against the walls. Steam rises from boiling broth. Sweaty servants push past one another carrying knives, baskets, and dripping cuts of meat. The stone floor feels damp beneath your boots. Grease coats the tables, smoke stings your eyes, and somewhere nearby, something has already started rotting. The odor mixes with everything else: burning fat, sour milk, fish scales, wet ash, garlic, animal blood. Together, they create a smell so powerful it settles permanently into the walls themselves. Kitchen servants suffered the worst conditions. Many worked from before sunrise until long after dark. The heat became exhausting during summer. Heavy smoke filled their lungs daily, and because kitchens handled raw meat constantly, infections spread easily through cuts and burns. Still, the work never stopped. A castle without food quickly became dangerous. Feeding hundreds of people every day required enormous effort, especially during winter. Cold months created different problems. Food lasted longer in freezing weather, but supplies often grew limited before spring arrived. Vegetables softened and mold in storage. Salted meat became hard and unpleasant. Ale barrels turned sour, and as fresh ingredients disappeared, kitchens relied increasingly on preserved foods already aging for months inside damp castle cellars. Sometimes entire rooms smelled of onions, mildew, and old meat together. The deeper one traveled into the storage chambers beneath the kitchens, the colder and stranger the castle became. Torchlight barely reached the corners, wooden shelves sagged beneath heavy barrels, water dripped slowly through cracks in the stone ceiling, and hidden in darkness, tiny movements revealed rats feeding quietly among forgotten scraps. Cats wandered the kitchens constantly trying to control them, but the rats always returned, at night, after the evening meal ended. Servants scraped leftovers into buckets while exhausted cooks cleaned iron pots blackened by years of fire. Grease floated across dirty water, bones piled beside cutting boards, and lingering through the smoky air remained the stale scent of cooked meat slowly cooling in the darkness. The castle kitchens never smelled fresh. Only stronger or weaker depending on the season, yet above these harsh underground rooms, nobles continued attending feasts beneath glowing candlelight. Roasted birds decorated banquet tables, fresh bread arrived steaming from ovens, silver goblets sparkled beside elaborate meals. Guests admired the luxury, few truly understood the exhausting, filthy world hidden beneath the castle floors where servants struggled endlessly to prepare every meal. Even fewer considered what happened when food spoiled completely. Sometimes supplies had to be thrown into waste pits outside the walls, sometimes desperate kitchens served questionable meat anyway during difficult winters or long sieges. And sometimes illness followed soon afterward. Tonight, deep inside the fortress, the kitchens finally grow quieter, the fires shrink low, servants finish washing wooden bowls in cold water while shadows flicker gently across soot-blackened walls. One exhausted cook pauses beside a storage room doorway. Behind him, rows of hanging meat sway slightly in the cool night air. The smell of salt, smoke, and age fills the darkness. Far above, nobles sleep peacefully after another enormous feast, but down here beneath the castle, the true cost of feeding a medieval fortress still lingers heavily in the air, and tomorrow morning, before sunrise returns, the kitchens will awaken once again, because castles were never clean places, not above the halls, and certainly not below them, and somewhere beyond the kitchens tonight. Another uncomfortable truth quietly waits inside the castle walls: the people themselves rarely bathed. As the castle slowly drifted toward midnight, the fires burned lower. The kitchens had finally grown quiet beneath the fortress. Servants slept wrapped in rough blankets near dying embers. Wind whispered softly through narrow arrow slits high above the walls, and throughout the castle. Beneath layers of wool, smoke, and candlelight, the scent of unwashed bodies lingered quietly in the air. To modern people, regular bathing feels ordinary, comforting, necessary, but inside the medieval world, bathing was surprisingly rare, especially inside castles, not because people enjoyed being dirty, and not because they completely ignored cleanliness. The truth was far more complicated. Bathing in medieval Europe could be difficult, expensive, uncomfortable, and sometimes even feared. Inside a castle, preparing a proper bath required enormous effort. Water had to be carried by hand, then heated over large fires, then hauled again in heavy buckets through staircases and narrow corridors toward private chambers. For a nobleman or noblewoman, dozens of servants might spend hours preparing a single bath. And once the water cooled, the process ended quickly. Most people simply could not afford such luxury regularly, especially servants, especially during winter. Imagine trying to bathe inside a freezing stone castle in January. Cold drafts slip beneath every door. The walls sweat with dampness. Outside, snow covers the courtyard while icy rain lashes against the towers. Even near fireplaces, warmth disappears quickly. Removing clothing in such conditions felt deeply uncomfortable, sometimes dangerous. Many medieval people believed sudden cold could weaken the body and invite illness, and because disease was poorly understood, strange fears developed around bathing itself. Certain physicians warned that hot baths opened the pores too much. allowing sickness to enter the body through the skin. Others worried public bathhouses spread disease or immoral behavior. Over time, especially after devastating outbreaks of plague, many people became increasingly cautious about bathing frequently. Instead, medieval cleanliness focused more on surface washing, hands, faces, occasionally hair. People rinsed small areas using bowls of water and cloths rather than fully immersing themselves. Perfumes, herbs, and clean linen helped mask body odor when possible, but inside crowded castles filled with smoke, sweat, and damp air, unpleasant smells always returned. Clothing made the problem worse. Medieval garments were heavy, wool absorbed moisture easily, fur linings trapped sweat. Thick layers prevented airflow, and because washing clothes required enormous labor, many garments remained unclean for long periods. The scent of smoke from fireplaces clung permanently to fabric, so did body odor, and the castle itself absorbed everything. Imagine entering the Great Hall after several weeks of winter storms. Dozens of people crowd near the fires seeking warmth, wet cloaks steam beside the hearths. Guards remove muddy boots near the entrance, children sleep beneath wool blankets while servants rush between tables carrying food. The air feels thick with humanity, not one single smell, but hundreds blending together: smoke, wet fabric, sweat, grease, mud, perfume oil struggling weakly beneath it all. Even nobles rarely smelled truly clean by modern standards. Kings wore scented gloves filled with flowers and herbs. Queens carried small perfume containers made from precious metals. Some wealthy families imported fragrant oils from distant lands, but these scents acted more like temporary disguises than real solutions. Bathing itself remained uncommon enough that special occasions sometimes surrounded it. Royal baths could feel ceremonial. Wooden tubs lined with cloth, steaming water carried carefully into private chambers, candles glowing softly against stone walls. For a brief moment, warmth and cleanliness existed together inside the harsh castle environment, but the effect never lasted long. Soon the smoke returned, the sweat returned. The daily realities of castle life covered everything once again. Servants endured the hardest conditions. Many performed exhausting labor from dawn until night with little opportunity for washing. Stable workers smelled constantly of horses and hay. Kitchen servants carried grease and smoke on their skin. Blacksmiths remained covered in soot and ash. And throughout crowded sleeping halls, the smell of unwashed bodies slowly settled into blankets, mattresses, and rush-covered floors. Summer made everything worse. Heat trapped odors inside the fortress, sweat soaked through clothing faster, and limited water supplies often prioritized cooking and drinking over bathing. Some castles possessed bath chambers built near heated rooms, but these spaces remained luxuries used mostly by the wealthy. For ordinary workers, cleanliness meant survival rather than comfort. Tonight, deep inside the fortress, an elderly servant quietly heats a small bowl of water beside a fading fire. Carefully, she washes her hands and face using a worn cloth before sleep. Nearby, other servants lie crowded together beneath rough blankets. The room smells faintly of damp wool and smoke. Outside, rain taps softly against the towers. The servant pauses for a moment beside the firelight. The warm water cools quickly in the winter air. Soon the flames will die completely, and cold darkness will return to the hall. Tomorrow, the castle will awaken once again beneath the same lingering smells carried through every corridor and chamber. Because medieval castles were not worlds of perfect royal elegance, they were human places, crowded places, and inside them, true cleanliness remained painfully difficult to achieve. Still, hidden within the stone walls tonight, other creatures thrive comfortably in these conditions. Tiny creatures, waiting quietly beneath blankets, inside straw mattresses, and deep within the cracks of the castle itself, fleas, lice, and rats. By midnight, the castle sounded different. The noise of feasting had faded hours ago. The kitchen slept beneath cooling ash, even the guards along the walls spoke softly now beneath the freezing night wind, but inside the darkness of the fortress. Other creatures were still awake. Tiny feet scratched behind the walls, something moved beneath the straw scattered across the floors, soft rustling came from the corners of sleeping halls where candlelight could no longer reach. The castle belonged to more than people, it belonged to fleas, lice, and rats. In medieval castles, pests were impossible to avoid, the conditions suited them perfectly: warm fires during winter, endless food scraps. Dark hidden spaces inside thick stone walls, crowded sleeping quarters filled with blankets, straw mattresses, and unwashed clothing. To these creatures, the castle was paradise. Rats entered through drainage tunnels, kitchens, stables, and cracks near the outer walls. Some grew large from feeding on castle waste for generations. At night, they emerged cautiously from shadows, searching for scraps beneath banquet tables and storage shelves. Servants heard them constantly, scratching behind wooden panels, running above ceilings, chewing through grain sacks in underground storerooms, and no matter how many cats the castle kept, the rats always returned. Imagine walking alone through a silent corridor after midnight. Your candle flickers weakly against the stone walls, the fortress feels cold and half asleep, then suddenly, movement. A rat disappears behind a barrel before the light fully reaches it. For a moment, the hallway falls silent again, but somewhere nearby, more are waiting in darkness. The kitchen suffered worst of all. Food scraps collected beneath tables and behind storage barrels. Rotting vegetables attracted insects. Grain stores drew rodents constantly. Some castles employed full-time rat catchers, others relied on cats wandering freely through the halls. Still, infestations remained common, and where rats thrived, disease often followed quietly behind them. But rats were only part of the problem. Far smaller creatures tormented castle life even more persistently. Fleas and lice lived almost everywhere, inside bedding, inside wool clothing, inside fur blankets and straw mattresses warmed nightly by sleeping bodies. Bathing remained uncommon, clothing washing was difficult, and crowded sleeping conditions allowed parasites to spread easily between people. At night, the itching began. A servant scratches beneath rough sleeves while trying to sleep beside the fire. A child wakes crying quietly inside the noble chambers upstairs. Even wealthy nobles suffered constantly from lice hidden beneath expensive fabrics and decorated hats. Tiny invisible insects moved freely through every social class inside the castle. No amount of gold or power could fully escape them. Medieval people tried many strange solutions. Herbs were stuffed into mattresses hoping strong scents would drive pests away. Comb makers sold fine lice combs carved from bone or wood. Some burned old bedding whenever infestations grew too severe, but nothing worked permanently. The castle itself remained too crowded, too warm, too difficult to clean completely. Straw bedding made conditions especially bad. Fresh straw smelled pleasant briefly after replacement, but over time it absorbed sweat, moisture, food crumbs, and insects. Fleas multiplied rapidly inside it. By winter, sleeping halls often became deeply uncomfortable despite the warmth of nearby fires. Imagine lying awake inside one of these crowded chambers. Dozens of people sleep shoulder to shoulder beneath heavy blankets. The air smells of smoke and damp wool. Candles flicker weakly beside stone pillars while wind groans softly. Beyond the walls and beneath the mattress, tiny movements continue unseen through the night. The itching never fully stops. In royal chambers, conditions improved only slightly. Nobles owned softer bedding and private rooms when fortunate enough, yet fleas still hid within expensive blankets. Lice still spread through hair and clothing. Even beautifully decorated beds could harbor parasites deep inside their fabric and straw stuffing. Animals inside the castle worsened everything. Dogs wandered freely through halls. Cats slept near kitchens, horses filled nearby stables with warmth and insects, every living creature carried pests, and medieval castles contained many living creatures packed closely together. Summer became especially miserable. Heat increased insect activity, flies gathered around waste, fleas multiplied rapidly in warm bedding, people scratched constantly during hot nights while struggling to sleep inside crowded halls thick with stale air. Yet despite these discomforts, life continued. Children still played in the courtyards, servants still carried food through smoky kitchens, nobles still attended feasts beneath glowing candlelight. The castle adapted to its pests because it had no choice. Tonight, deep inside the fortress, a young servant wakes suddenly beneath rough wool blankets. The fire nearby has almost died. Cold darkness fills the sleeping hall. He scratches absent-mindedly at his arm while listening to soft sounds echoing through the room. Someone coughs in the distance. Wind whistles through cracks high above. Then comes another sound, tiny scratching beneath the floorboards. The servant closes his eyes again, because inside a medieval castle, such sounds were ordinary, part of the night itself. Part of living inside an ancient fortress where humans shared space with countless unseen creatures hidden quietly within the walls, and as the castle settles deeper into darkness tonight, another uncomfortable reality slowly waits ahead: the crowded sleeping halls themselves. By the time midnight fully settled across the castle, the sleeping halls had become worlds of their own. The fires burned low beneath layers of glowing ash, candles flickered weakly along distant walls. Outside, cold wind drifted through the towers while rain whispered softly against the fortress roofs, and inside the crowded halls, hundreds of people tried to sleep together. The smell was impossible to escape. In modern life, sleep usually happens in quiet private rooms, but inside medieval castles, privacy was rare. Most servants, guards, workers, travelers, and even lower-ranking nobles slept communally in large shared chambers scattered throughout the fortress. Rows of wooden beds lined the walls. Some people slept directly on straw pallets spread across the floor. Others curled beneath rough blankets beside fading fireplaces seeking warmth during freezing nights. Every breath filled the room, every damp cloak, every muddy boot, every unwashed body wrapped in heavy wool clothing. After a long day inside the castle, the sleeping halls slowly absorbed it all. Imagine entering one just after midnight. The air feels warm near the crowded beds but strangely damp beneath the stone ceiling. Smoke from the fireplaces still hangs lightly overhead. Wet clothing dries beside the hearths. The scent of old straw rises from the floor and everywhere around you. People sleep packed closely together. Some snore heavily, others cough softly through the darkness. A child murmurs in restless dreams somewhere near the far wall while a tired servant shifts beneath scratchy blankets trying to escape the cold. The hall never becomes completely silent, nor completely fresh. Human bodies generated enormous heat inside these crowded chambers. During winter, this warmth became necessary for survival. Stone castles trapped cold relentlessly, without shared sleeping spaces and nearby fires. Many rooms became dangerously freezing overnight. But the warmth created another problem. Odors thickened in the still air. Sweat collected inside blankets. Damp boots steamed slowly near the hearths. Unwashed clothing released stale smells trapped deep inside heavy fabric. And because windows remained closed against winter storms, fresh air rarely entered the halls. Everything lingered. The castle seemed to breathe the same exhausted air night after night. Straw bedding made conditions worse over time. Fresh straw initially smelled earthy and clean, but after weeks beneath sleeping bodies, it absorbed moisture, sweat, spilled food, mud, and insects. Some halls replaced straw occasionally, many did not. The deeper layers slowly rotted beneath newer materials spread above them. At night, The combined smell became almost sweet and sour at the same time, an odor medieval people simply accepted as normal. The sleeping arrangements also reflected medieval social order. High nobles often possessed private chambers with curtains, fireplaces, and larger beds, but servants and guards crowded together in far harsher conditions. Some slept near kitchens for warmth, others rested in corridors, towers, or storage rooms when space disappeared. Travelers visiting the castle sometimes shared halls with strangers they had never met before. Personal space barely existed, even sleep became communal. Imagine trying to rest after a long day inside the fortress. The fire crackles nearby. Smoke drifts softly overhead, but around you, dozens of other people breathe, cough, snore, whisper, and shift endlessly through the darkness. A dog wanders between beds searching for scraps. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, rats scratch faintly behind the walls, and through everything. The smell remains: heavy wool, smoke, sweat, wet leather, damp straw, the scent of too many people living too closely together inside cold stone walls. Summer nights became even more uncomfortable. Heat trapped itself inside crowded sleeping halls while insects multiplied rapidly in the warm air. People sweated beneath blankets despite opening shutters whenever possible. The castle smelled stronger during these months, almost alive. Servants sometimes carried herbs through the halls before sleep: lavender, rosemary, mint. Bundles hung beside beds or scattered across floors in hopes of softening the odor, but by morning, the stronger smells always returned. Life inside medieval castles depended on endurance. People adapted because there was little alternative. A crowded sleeping hall still offered safety from storms, bandits, wild animals, and war outside the walls. Even uncomfortable shelter felt precious during uncertain times. Tonight, deep inside one of these great halls, the fire finally shrinks low into glowing embers. Most candles have burned away completely. Moonlight slips faintly through narrow windows high above the sleeping crowd. The room smells warm and stale. A guard removes his boots quietly before lying beside the others near the wall. Nearby, an elderly servant sleeps sitting upright beneath a rough cloak, too exhausted even to stretch out fully. The castle settles around them slowly. Stone creaks softly in the cold night air. Rain taps against distant rooftops, and inside the crowded darkness, hundreds of people continue breathing together beneath layers of smoke and dampness trapped inside the ancient fortress. Tomorrow morning, the halls will empty again. The fires will roar back to life. Servants will replace a little straw, shake out blankets, and open shutters briefly to let cold air sweep through the room, but no amount of fresh wind will fully remove the smells buried deep within the castle itself, because medieval castles were not built for comfort, they were built simply to endure. And waiting quietly beyond these sleeping halls tonight, another unpleasant problem still hangs from every wooden hook and crowded wardrobe: dirty clothing. Morning inside the castle arrived with dampness. Cold mist drifted across the courtyards, rainwater clung to the stone walls, and throughout the fortress, servants slowly dressed themselves in clothing that never truly felt clean. The smell of the castle lived inside its fabric. Every cloak, every wool tunic, every heavy blanket and fur-lined sleeve carried traces of smoke, sweat, mud, grease, and moisture gathered over months of daily use. Inside medieval castles, clothing was far more valuable than most modern people realize. A single well-made garment could require enormous labor and expense. Wool had to be cleaned, spun, woven, dyed, and sewn by hand. Fine fabrics traveled long distances. Fur linings belonged mostly to the wealthy. Because clothing cost so much, people wore the same garments repeatedly for years, and washing them properly was difficult, especially inside castles. Large amounts of water had to be carried manually from wells, rivers, or rain barrels. Heating water required firewood and time. drying heavy fabric during wet weather could take days. Some garments were almost impossible to wash without damaging them. So instead, many people simply aired clothing near fires, brushed dirt away, or covered unpleasant smells using herbs and perfume oils. But beneath these efforts, the odors remained. Imagine stepping into a crowded corridor during winter. Wet cloaks hang from wooden pegs beside the walls, steam rises slowly from damp wool near the fireplaces, the air smells thick, smoke from the hearths clings permanently to the fabric, mud from the courtyard dries along the hems of noble robes, sweat trapped inside heavy layers lingers faintly beneath stronger scents of ash and rainwater. The castle itself seems wrapped in old clothing. Servants suffered worst of all, most owned very few garments. A stable worker might wear the same wool tunic every day while cleaning horses, hauling straw, and sleeping beside smoky fires at night. Kitchen workers stained their sleeves with grease and ash. Guards wore padded layers beneath armor that absorbed sweat during long hours on patrol, and because medieval fabrics dried slowly in damp castles, clothing often remained slightly wet for days. This created a sour smell many visitors noticed immediately. Even noble wardrobes faced problems. Rich fabrics absorbed odors deeply. Velvet curtains trapped smoke from fireplaces. Fur collars carried the scent of damp weather. Heavy embroidered gowns rarely washed properly due to delicate stitching and expensive dyes. Perfume became essential for the upper classes. Rosewater, lavender oils, herbal sachets hidden within sleeves and collars. Some nobles carried scented cloths to hold near their faces while walking through unpleasant areas of the castle, but perfumes could only cover so much. Eventually, the smells beneath them returned. At night, servants often spread clothing near the great hearths hoping warmth would dry the dampness by morning. Rows of cloaks and tunics hung beside crackling fires. While smoke curled slowly through the fabric, the result solved one problem but worsened another. Everything smelled even more strongly of smoke afterward. Over time, castle clothing developed a permanent scent impossible to remove completely. A mixture of firewood, sweat, wet wool, and old stone air. Imagine entering the royal chambers after several days of rain. Expensive cloaks hang near the fireplace drying slowly. Servants brush mud from riding boots beside the door. The room appears elegant in candlelight. Golden embroidery glows softly across dark fabrics. Perfumed oils rest on carved wooden tables, but beneath the appearance of luxury, the smell of damp clothing quietly fills the chamber. Because no amount of wealth could fully defeat the conditions inside the castle itself, the weather made everything harder. During winter, clothes rarely dried fully. During summer, sweat soaked through heavy layers almost immediately. Rain turned castle courtyards into seas of mud that stained every hem and boot crossing them, and inside crowded sleeping halls, piles of damp garments created thick stale air throughout the night. Fleas and lice loved clothing too. They hid within seams, fur linings, blankets, and hats. Washing garments thoroughly enough to remove parasites required effort few people could manage regularly. Some clothing became infested for months. Still, medieval people valued appearance deeply despite these conditions. Bright colors symbolized status, expensive fabrics displayed wealth. A nobleman entering the great hall in richly dyed robes still commanded admiration, even if the garment smelled faintly of smoke and damp wool beneath its perfume. Tonight, as rain falls softly beyond the castle walls, servants move quietly through the halls gathering clothing left to dry near the fires. The fabric feels warm but still slightly damp. One servant folds a heavy cloak carrying the scent of horses and wet earth from a recent journey. Another brushes soot from noble garments before hanging them carefully beside embroidered curtains. The fires glow low, smoke drifts lazily upward, and throughout the fortress, the smell of old clothing settles once more into every chamber, hallway, and sleeping hall inside the ancient stone castle. Tomorrow, the garments will be worn again. The smoke will cling again, the rain will soak through wool again, because inside medieval castles, cleanliness was temporary, but dampness lasted forever, and somewhere beyond these crowded wardrobes tonight, another source of overwhelming odor quietly waits inside the castle grounds: the animals. Before dawn touched the castle towers, the animals were already awake. Horses shifted restlessly inside the stables. Dogs wandered through the dark courtyard searching for scraps left from yesterday's meals. Chickens scratched quietly near the kitchens while distant crows gathered along the outer walls beneath the pale grey sky. The medieval castle was never only a home for people, it was a home for animals too, and wherever animals gathered in large numbers, smells followed close behind. Modern castles displayed in museums often appear strangely empty and silent, but real medieval fortresses were crowded with life: horses, dogs, cats, goats, pigs, chickens, falcons, oxen. Some animals worked, some provided food, others hunted rats or guarded the grounds. Together, they formed an essential part of castle survival, but they also transformed the fortress into a place filled constantly with noise, mud, fur, insects, and waste. Imagine stepping into the castle courtyard just after sunrise. Mist rises softly from damp earth beneath your boots. Stable boys carry buckets through puddles while horses snort clouds of warm breath into the freezing air. Dogs bark somewhere near the gatehouse. The smell arrives immediately: wet hay, horse manure, animal sweat, mud mixed with rainwater, and beneath it all, the sour scent of waste slowly soaking into the ground after years inside the crowded fortress walls. The stables smelled strongest of all. Large castles often housed dozens, sometimes hundreds, of horses. War horses for knights, travel horses for messengers, work animals for hauling supplies. These creatures required constant care. They ate enormous quantities of hay and grain. They produced mountains of manure daily. Servants worked endlessly shoveling straw and waste from the stable floors. But the smell never truly disappeared, especially during winter, when doors remained closed against cold winds. Warm animal breath filled the air. Steam rose from damp straw. Flies lingered even during colder months near piles of manure stacked beside the outer walls. Stable workers carried the scent everywhere, their boots soaked in mud and waste. Their clothing smelled permanently of horses and hay. Inside the castle halls, people could often identify stable servants immediately just by their scent. Dogs moved freely through many parts of the fortress. Some guarded entrances, others hunted beside noble families. Many simply wandered. They slept near fireplaces, scavenged beneath banquet tables, and followed servants through busy kitchens hoping for scraps. Though useful companions, dogs also carried fleas, dirt, and strong odors into already crowded rooms. Cats served a different purpose. The castle depended on them to control rats and mice hidden throughout storage rooms and kitchens. Yet even cats contributed their own smells, fur, and mess to the fortress environment. Animals and humans lived astonishingly close together. Sometimes chickens wandered directly through the courtyards beside noble guests. Goats grazed near defensive walls. During harsh weather, smaller animals occasionally sheltered inside storage rooms or empty corridors for warmth. The castle blurred the boundary between human space and animal space constantly. Summer turned the courtyards miserable. Heat intensified every odor. Manure baked beneath the sun. Flies multiplied rapidly. Stagnant puddles formed near stables after rainfall. The air itself seemed heavier. Visitors approaching the castle during hot weather often smelled the fortress long before seeing its towers clearly through the countryside. Even noble life remained connected to animals. Falcons perched inside elegant chambers before hunts. Hunting dogs rested beside noble fireplaces. Royal horses occupied the finest stable spaces within the fortress. No amount of wealth separated medieval people completely from the animal world surrounding them. At night, The sounds continued, horses stomping softly against stable floors, dogs growling faintly in distant corridors. Owls calling beyond the walls while unseen creatures rustled through straw piles near the kitchens. The castle never truly slept, it breathed with animal life constantly moving beneath its stone towers. Imagine standing quietly in the courtyard after midnight. Rainwater glistens faintly across the mud, torchlight flickers beside the stables where tired servants finish cleaning stalls before dawn. Warm steam rises from the horses inside, the smell of hay, wet earth, and manure fills the cold air above you. The castle windows glow softly in darkness while nobles sleep behind embroidered curtains, completely dependent on the labor of the animals below. Without horses, the castle could not travel or fight. Without cats, rats would overwhelm food stores. Without dogs, security weakened. Animals were not separate from castle life. They were part of the fortress itself, necessary, unavoidable, and deeply woven into the daily rhythm of medieval survival. Tonight, as wind moves softly across the towers, a stable boy closes the heavy wooden doors against the cold inside. The horses settle slowly into silence. Outside, the courtyard remains thick with mud and the lingering scent of animals that will never fully leave the castle grounds. Tomorrow morning, the stables will awaken again before sunrise. Fresh straw will cover old waste. Dogs will wander beneath banquet tables once more, and the fortress will continue living exactly as it always has. Surrounded by the smells of the creatures keeping it alive, and somewhere beyond the stables tonight, another foul reality quietly waits beside the castle walls: the garbage. Beyond the castle walls, hidden beside muddy roads and beneath swarms of flies, lay the forgotten remains of daily life, the garbage pits. Every medieval castle produced enormous amounts of waste: rotting food, animal bones, broken tools, spoiled grain, ash from fireplaces, old straw bedding soaked with sweat and insects, animal manure from the stables, human waste carried out from chamber pots before sunrise. Day after day, year after year, the fortress created mountains of refuse, and somehow, all of it had to go somewhere. Modern cities hide garbage quickly, trucks carry it away, pipes remove waste underground. But medieval castles possessed no such systems. The smell stayed close. Very close. At dawn, servants pushed wooden carts through the courtyards carrying yesterday's waste toward dumping grounds outside the fortress walls. The work was miserable. Buckets leaked, rotting scraps dripped into the mud, flies gathered immediately around spoiled food and animal remains. During summer heat, the smell became almost unbearable. Even during winter, the odor lingered beneath the cold air. Imagine walking beyond the castle gates after rain. The countryside looks peaceful beneath gray skies. Mist rolls softly across distant hills. Crows circle lazily above the walls. Then the wind shifts. Suddenly the smell arrives. Rotting vegetables, sour ale, animal carcasses, wet ash, human waste slowly decaying in open pits beside the fortress. No matter how grand the castle appeared from a distance, the garbage always reminded visitors of the unpleasant reality hidden behind its walls. The dumping grounds attracted every scavenger imaginable. Dogs searched through scraps, rats multiplied rapidly near food waste, crows and ravens gathered constantly beside the pits. Sometimes pigs wandered nearby feeding on discarded leftovers. The castle garbage became its own strange ecosystem, and with it came disease. Rotting waste contaminated nearby water during heavy rains. Flies carried bacteria back toward kitchens and sleeping halls. During warm weather, the air near the dumping ground seemed thick and alive with insects. Still, the garbage never stopped accumulating. A single feast inside the great hall could produce enormous piles of bones, spoiled food, broken dishes, and greasy scraps within only a few hours after banquets ended. Servants worked late into the night clearing tables while the fortress above slowly drifted toward sleep. Some scraps fed animals, others burned in fires, but much of it simply rotted outside the walls. The smell often drifted back toward the castle itself, especially during still weather when no wind carried it away. Imagine standing atop the walls at sunset. The sky glows softly orange beyond the countryside. Smoke rises from distant village chimneys. Below, near the refuse pits, servants empty wooden barrels into dark mounds already buzzing with flies. The odor climbs upward slowly through the cooling evening air. Even high above the ground, the castle cannot fully escape its own waste. During sieges, conditions became far worse. When enemies surrounded the fortress, garbage removal became nearly impossible. Waste piled inside the walls. Animal carcasses sometimes remained unburied for days. Food spoiled in overcrowded storage rooms. The smell spread everywhere. Some historical accounts describe castles during sieges becoming nearly unbearable after weeks of trapped waste and contaminated air. Yet survival mattered more than comfort. People endured because they had no choice. Rain created different problems. Heavy storms washed refuse downhill into streams and wells near the fortress. Mud mixed with garbage until the ground itself smelled rotten. Servants struggled to push carts through slippery courtyards while foul water pooled beneath their boots. Even noble visitors crossing the ground sometimes covered their noses with scented cloths during bad weather. The castle depended completely on constant cleaning labor. Without servants removing waste daily, the fortress would quickly become unlivable. And still, even with endless effort, true cleanliness remained impossible. At night, the dumping grounds grew strangely quiet. The workers disappeared. The carts stood empty beside the gates. Only scavengers remained moving softly through darkness. A dog drags an old bone through the mud. Rats slip between broken barrels beneath moonlight. Somewhere nearby, crows rustle faintly in sleep among bare tree branches overlooking the waste pits. The smell lingers heavily in the cold air. Rot, ash, damp earth, decay. The unavoidable scent of a castle trying endlessly to survive while producing more waste than it could ever truly remove. Tonight, a servant carrying ashes from the great hall pauses briefly near the dumping grounds before returning inside the fortress. He stares toward the towering castle walls rising above the darkness. Warm candlelight glows faintly from high windows. From a distance, the fortress still appears magnificent, powerful, almost beautiful. But here beside the garbage pits, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. Medieval castles were not clean places hidden from filth. They created filth constantly, and no matter how many torches burned in royal chambers, the smell of waste always waited just beyond the walls. Tomorrow morning, the carts will roll again, fresh refuse will join the old, and the fortress will continue breathing its endless cycle of smoke, mud, food, animals, and decay beneath the cold medieval sky. And somewhere deeper within the castle tonight, another hidden danger quietly waits in wooden barrels and stone wells: the water itself. Inside the medieval castle, water was never simple. It arrived in heavy buckets before sunrise. It dripped slowly through stone wells deep beneath the fortress. It collected in rain barrels beside the walls where leaves, insects, and dirt floated quietly across the surface. And despite how precious it was, the water itself could become dangerous. After weeks surrounded by smoke, waste, animals, and crowded halls, the people inside the castle depended on fresh water for survival, for drinking, cooking, washing wounds, preparing food, brewing ale. Without reliable water, the fortress could not function for long. Yet finding truly clean water during medieval times remained incredibly difficult. Most castles relied on wells dug deep into the earth or nearby rivers and streams flowing beyond the walls. Some collected rainwater from rooftops into large storage barrels or underground cisterns. At first glance, these systems seemed practical, but medieval castles faced a constant problem: contamination. Imagine descending into the lower levels of the fortress before dawn. Torchlight flickers against damp stone staircases while cold air rises from underground tunnels, somewhere. Below, servants pull water slowly upward from a deep well hidden beneath the castle. The rope creaks softly, water splashes faintly in darkness, the smell of wet stone fills the air. At that moment, the water appears clean, but hidden dangers already surround it. Garbage pits often sat too close to water sources, animal waste washed through the courtyards after rainstorms, human sewage from guardrobes seeped slowly into the ground near castle foundations, and because medieval people did not fully understand bacteria or microscopic disease, contaminated water often looked perfectly safe. The consequences could become deadly. A single polluted well might spread illness through the entire fortress, stomach pain, fever, vomiting, weakness. Sometimes outbreaks appeared suddenly without obvious explanation. People blamed bad air, curses, weather changes, or divine punishment. Few realized the water itself carried invisible dangers. During sieges, conditions became especially frightening. If enemies poisoned a river or blocked access to fresh streams, castles relied entirely on stored water inside the walls. Over time, barrels stagnated, wells became overcrowded. Supplies grew limited, and as sanitation worsened inside the trapped fortress, contamination spread more easily. Imagine hundreds of frightened people living inside sealed stone walls for weeks. The air smells of smoke and sweat. Garbage piles grow larger near the courtyards. Rainwater mixes with mud and waste. Meanwhile, every bucket of drinking water becomes more precious than gold. Servants guarded wells carefully during such times, because once clean water disappeared, survival itself became uncertain. Even during peaceful years, water often tasted unpleasant. Minerals from underground sources created strange flavors. Rain barrels collected dirt from rooftops where birds nested above the castle. Wooden storage containers developed mold or algae during warmer months. Sometimes insects floated inside the buckets. Still, people drank because they had little choice. Many medieval households consumed ale or weak beer daily, partly because brewing involved boiling liquid during preparation, making it somewhat safer than uncertain water sources. Even children often drank diluted ale. Inside castles, large brewing operations worked constantly to provide safer alternatives for daily drinking, yet water remained essential for everything else. Kitchen servants carried endless buckets through smoky corridors. Stable workers hauled water for horses. Bath preparation required enormous effort, moving heated water from room to room. And throughout the fortress, spills turned stone floors damp and slippery beneath constant traffic. The wells themselves could feel unsettling, deep, cold, silent. Some descended far below the castle into darkness untouched by sunlight. Torchlight barely revealed the wet stone walls surrounding them. The echo of dripping water seemed endless underground. Medieval people sometimes filled these places with superstition. Stories spread of poisoned wells, hidden spirits, or mysterious illnesses rising from beneath the earth itself. Tonight, deep below the sleeping fortress, a servant lowers a bucket slowly into the castle well. The rope disappears into darkness. Far above, faint footsteps echo somewhere in the distant corridors. The air feels cold and damp against the stone walls. Finally, the bucket splashes softly below. The servant begins pulling it upward carefully, hand over hand. The water glimmers faintly in torchlight, clean enough to drink, perhaps, or perhaps not. Inside medieval castles, certainty rarely existed. Not about illness, not about safety, and certainly not about the water hidden beneath the fortress. Tomorrow morning, the same water will fill noble cups in the great hall. It will boil inside kitchen pots. It will wash wounds and dampen cloths beside smoky fires. Life throughout the castle depends completely upon it, yet hidden within those dark wells and barrels, danger always waits quietly unseen. Because medieval castles trapped more than smoke and foul smells inside their walls, sometimes they trapped sickness too, and as rain begins falling softly across the towers tonight. Another unpleasant problem quietly spreads deeper through the fortress stone itself: dampness. The rain had been falling for days, not violent storms, not thunder, only a slow, endless drizzle drifting across the countryside and soaking itself deep into the ancient castle walls. Inside the fortress, the dampness spread quietly. It crept through corridors before sunrise. It gathered beneath carpets and straw bedding. It clung to heavy curtains and wooden furniture until the entire castle seemed to breathe cold moisture with every passing hour. Stone castles look powerful from a distance, immovable, solid, timeless, but inside, they were often wet, very wet. Medieval builders designed castles for defense first, comfort second. Thick stone walls protected against arrows and siege weapons. Yet they also trapped moisture easily. Rainwater seeped into cracks over time. Condensation formed on cold surfaces during winter mornings. Underground chambers remained damp almost year-round, and because sunlight rarely reached many interior rooms, nothing dried properly. The smell followed naturally: mold, wet straw, rotting wood, cold stone soaked by centuries of rain. It settled invisibly into every chamber of the fortress. Imagine walking through a narrow castle corridor at dawn. Your footsteps echo softly against uneven stone floors. The air feels chilly even near the fireplaces. Tiny droplets of moisture cling to the walls beside flickering torches somewhere nearby. Water drips steadily into darkness. The smell is earthy, old, like wet soil trapped inside ancient stone. Servants fought the dampness constantly. They opened shutters whenever weather allowed, hoping fresh air might dry the room slightly. Fires burned endlessly during colder months, trying to reduce moisture in sleeping chambers and halls. Still, the castle remained stubbornly damp. Heavy tapestries hanging along the walls absorbed moisture over time. At first, these fabrics helped block cold drafts, but eventually they developed musty smells difficult to remove. Mold spread quietly behind them where air barely moved. Wooden furniture warped slowly in the wet air. Storage chests collected mildew. Blankets and clothing never felt fully dry after long weeks of rain. Even noble chambers suffered. Imagine entering a royal bedroom late at night. Candles glow softly across embroidered curtains while a fire crackles low beside the bed. The room appears warm, comfortable, but beneath the perfume oils and candle smoke lingers another scent: damp stone. The walls themselves seem cold enough to touch winter directly. Moisture gathers faintly along the windows. The carpet smells slightly musty beneath your feet, and no amount of royal luxury fully escapes the castle's endless battle against water. Below ground, conditions became worse. Cellars storing food often remained dark and humid throughout the year. Barrels swelled with moisture. Wood rotted slowly in hidden corners. Mold spread across forgotten vegetables and grain sacks when servants failed to inspect them quickly enough. Some underground rooms smelled almost like caves, cold, wet, silent. The deeper one traveled beneath the fortress, the heavier the damp air became. Even sleeping halls suffered constantly from moisture. During winter, dozens of people breathing through the night filled crowded chambers with humid air trapped behind closed shutters. Blankets absorbed sweat and dampness together. By morning, the rooms smelled stale and wet despite the warmth of the fires nearby. Summer storms created another misery. Rainwater leaked through aging roofs and stone cracks into upper chambers. Buckets sometimes lined hallways, catching steady drips from ceilings. Servants rushed endlessly, moving furniture and bedding away from spreading moisture. The castle never fully dried before the next storm arrived. Mold affected health too, though medieval people lacked scientific understanding. Many noticed how damp rooms seemed connected to sickness: persistent coughs, breathing troubles, fevers during cold, wet winters. Yet little could truly solve the problem. the fortress itself trapped moisture by design. Tonight, rain taps softly against the towers once again. Deep inside the castle, an elderly servant walks slowly through a corridor carrying fresh rushes for the sleeping halls. Her candlelight flickers against stone walls glistening faintly with moisture. The air smells of wet straw and smoke. As she passes beneath a tapestry near the great hall, droplets of water slide quietly down the cold stone hidden behind the fabric. Somewhere below, water drips steadily inside the underground storage rooms. The sound echoes faintly upward through the sleeping fortress. Outside, mist curls around the towers beneath the dark sky. Inside, the dampness settles deeper into blankets, wooden beams, and ancient walls that have endured centuries of rain. Tomorrow morning, servants will dry what they can beside the fires. Windows may open briefly if the weather clears, but the moisture will remain, because medieval castles were never truly dry places, only colder or warmer versions of dampness hidden beneath smoke and stone, and somewhere within these wet corridors tonight, another uncomfortable truth quietly waits behind heavy curtains and carved wooden doors: the royal bedrooms themselves. Far above the noisy kitchens, beyond the crowded sleeping halls and damp underground cellars, the royal chambers waited in silence. At least, they appeared silent. Thick curtains softened the sound of footsteps. Large fireplaces glowed warmly against carved stone walls. Expensive tapestries covered the cold surfaces beneath candlelight. To visiting guests, these rooms looked luxurious, almost magical, but beneath the velvet fabrics and golden decorations, royal bedrooms carried their own strange and unpleasant smells. The scent of medieval power was not as elegant as history often imagines. Imagine entering a royal chamber late at night. The castle beyond the doors has grown quiet. Rain taps softly against narrow windows while candles flicker beside an enormous bed draped in embroidered curtains. At first, the room feels impressive. Warm firelight glows across polished wooden furniture. Perfumed oils rest on silver trays near the bedside. Rich fabrics hang heavily from the walls. Then slowly, the deeper smells begin to appear. Smoke from the fireplace soaked into every curtain and blanket. Damp stone cooled the room beneath the warmth of the fire. Old straw mattresses carried years of trapped sweat and dust beneath decorative coverings. And somewhere nearby, hidden discreetly behind curtains or furniture, stood a chamber pot quietly waiting for the night. Even kings and queens lived surrounded by odors impossible to escape completely. Royal beds themselves were enormous compared to ordinary sleeping spaces. Feather mattresses laid atop straw stuffing created softer bedding for nobles fortunate enough to afford them, but these mattresses collected moisture over time. Dust gathered inside heavy blankets, fleas hid deep within fabric seams, and because cleaning such expensive bedding remained difficult, unpleasant smells slowly settled into the materials year after year. Servants worked constantly trying to improve the atmosphere. Fresh herbs decorated the rooms: lavender, rose petals, rosemary, sometimes sweet-smelling rushes covered the floors. Perfume oils burned gently beside candlelight during important visits, yet no fragrance lasted forever. The castle always returned beneath it. Imagine a cold winter evening inside the Queen's chamber. The fireplace crackles softly while servants pull thick curtains closed against the storm outside. Wet cloaks dry near the hearth after a long journey through rain. Steam rises faintly from damp wool. The room smells warm but heavy: smoke, perfume, moisture, old fabric, and beneath everything else, the quiet human scent of people living inside enclosed stone walls without modern cleanliness. Privacy in royal bedrooms was also surprisingly limited. Servants entered constantly. Ladies in waiting prepared clothing. Guards remained nearby. Messengers arrived at all hours carrying news or requests. Some nobles even slept in the same chamber as trusted attendants for security and comfort during dangerous times. The royal bedroom was not always peaceful. It was a place of work, politics, illness, childbirth, conversation, and sleep all mixed together inside one enclosed space, and every activity left traces behind in the air. Sick rooms smelled especially unpleasant. When nobles became ill, servants filled chambers with medicinal herbs, heated wine, smoke from candles, and damp cloths placed against fevered skin. The heavy air grew stale quickly behind closed curtains. Many castles feared cold draughts, believing fresh night air invited sickness, so windows often stayed shut even when the room desperately needed ventilation. The result was suffocating warmth trapped beside smoke and human breath. Summer brought different discomforts. Heat lingered inside upper chambers beneath the castle roofs. Perfumes turned overpowering in the warm air. Candles softened and dripped across wooden furniture. Flies entered through narrow windows searching for food and moisture. And despite every effort to maintain royal elegance, sweat and dampness remained unavoidable. Some nobles attempted unusual solutions. Sweet flowers filled decorative bowls beside the bed. Orange peels and herbs hid inside clothing chests. Expensive incense burned during important ceremonies or royal visits. But medieval castles were simply too damp, crowded, and smoky for true freshness to survive long. Tonight, deep inside the fortress, the king's chamber grows quieter as servants extinguish several candles before sleep. The fire still glows low beside the bed. Heavy curtains sway slightly with cold drafts creeping through the stone walls. Near the fireplace, damp riding cloaks continue drying slowly after a long day of rain. The room smells rich, but not clean. Outside the chamber doors, guards whisper softly in the corridor. Far below, the kitchen settles into darkness while rats move quietly through forgotten corners of the castle. Yet even here, inside the most powerful room in the fortress, the same uncomfortable realities remain: smoke, moisture, sweat, old fabric, lingering waste hidden discreetly nearby. Royal life inside medieval castles was never truly separated from discomfort. Before the sun rose above the castle towers, the servants were already awake, long before nobles opened their eyes beneath embroidered blankets. Footsteps echoed quietly through the fortress corridors, buckets scraped across stone floors, firewood cracked softly in cold hands, water sloshed through narrow staircases lit only by trembling candlelight. The castle survived because servants never truly rested. Behind every glowing banquet hall and royal chamber stood hundreds of exhausted workers carrying the endless burden of medieval castle life, and much of that burden smelled terrible. Imagine the fortress before dawn. The halls remain dark and freezing, rain taps softly against the outer walls. Yet below the great chambers, servants already hurry through smoky kitchens preparing fires for the morning meal. Others clean chamber pots left overnight beside noble beds. Stable workers shovel manure beneath steaming horses while sleepy guards patrol silent corridors overhead. The castle depends entirely on labor hidden from noble eyes. Most servants lived difficult lives. Many slept in crowded halls near kitchens, stables, or storage rooms where warmth remained easier to find during winter. Their blankets smelled of smoke and damp straw. Their clothing rarely dried completely, and every day began with unpleasant tasks few nobles ever considered carefully. Some servants hauled water endlessly from wells deep beneath the fortress. Others carried heavy baskets of food through greasy kitchens thick with smoke and steam. Young boys cleaned fireplaces coated in soot. Women scrubbed stained rushes from great hall floors after feasts ended. And certain workers faced the worst jobs of all: waste removal. Imagine descending a narrow staircase before sunrise carrying a leaking bucket through darkness. The air smells cold and damp. Somewhere above, nobles still sleep peacefully inside warm chambers, but below, servants empty chamber pots into carts already filled with human waste collected throughout the night. The smell clings to their clothing immediately, and by morning, they must continue working as though nothing happened. The labor never truly ended. Castle life created constant mess, food spoiled, Fires produced ash, animals filled courtyards with waste, water spilled across stone floors, and because medieval castles trapped dampness so easily, cleaning often felt impossible. Servants scrubbed endlessly without ever making the fortress truly clean. Even laundry became exhausting. Heavy wool garments absorbed water until impossible to lift easily. Sheets and blankets required enormous effort to wash by hand. During rainy weather, damp fabric hung throughout the castle for days beside smoky fires trying slowly to dry. The smell of wet cloth followed servants constantly. Kitchen workers faced another misery entirely. Heat from giant hearths turned underground kitchens suffocating during summer. Grease coated the walls, steam filled the air. Servants chopped meat, carried boiling water, and cleaned animal remains from sunrise until late night beneath endless smoke. Burns and cuts happened regularly. Still, the meals had to continue. The higher the castle's status, the greater the burden placed upon its servants. Royal feasts demanded enormous preparation. Fresh rushes scattered across floors, candles replaced, tables cleaned, dozens of dishes prepared simultaneously, and after the celebration ended, servants remained awake long into the night clearing bones, spoiled food, spilled wine, and dirty dishes from the halls. Imagine the great hall after midnight. The nobles have finally departed. Candles burn low beside abandoned goblets and greasy wooden plates. The room smells stale. Wine soaked into the rush-covered floor. Smoke drifts lazily through the rafters, and slowly, silently, servants begin restoring order before dawn arrives once again. Many servants entered castle life young. Some worked there their entire lives without ever escaping the fortress walls. Their bodies carried permanent signs of labor, ash-blackened hands from fireplaces, sore backs from hauling water and firewood, clothing permanently scented with kitchens, stables, or waste pits depending on their duties. Yet despite their hardships, servants knew the castle intimately. They understood its hidden staircases, its quiet nighttime sounds, its damp corridors and smoky chambers. While nobles experienced the castle as a symbol of power, servants experienced it as exhausting daily survival. At night, when the halls finally quieted, servants often slept only a few hours before beginning again. A castle never fully stopped moving. Someone always needed water, someone always needed food, some fire always needed tending against the cold. Tonight, deep inside the fortress, an elderly servant kneels beside the great hall fireplace brushing ash into a small iron pan. Before sleep, the fire glows faintly against her tired face. Around her, the enormous hall stands empty at last. The smell of smoke, wine, damp rushes, and cold stone fills the darkness. Outside, wind moves softly through the towers. Tomorrow morning, nobles will awaken to warm fires and fresh meals prepared as though by magic. Few will notice the aching hands carrying wood before sunrise. Few will think about the servants scrubbing waste from corridors late into the night. Yet without them, the castle would collapse into filth within days. Because medieval castles were not maintained by elegance, they survived through endless human labor hidden quietly beneath the glow of candlelight and royal comfort. And somewhere deeper inside the fortress tonight, another invisible danger still lingers among the crowded halls and damp chambers: disease. The castle looked strongest during winter. Thick stone walls rose proudly against gray skies. Fires glowed behind narrow windows. Guards patrolled the towers while smoke curled upward into the cold evening air. From a distance, the fortress appeared safe, protected, untouchable, but hidden behind those walls. Sickness often moved quietly from room to room unseen. In medieval castles, disease was a constant shadow. The fortress trapped everything together: smoke, waste, animals, crowded sleeping halls, dampness, and eventually infection. Without modern medicine or scientific understanding, even small illnesses could become frightening very quickly. A minor cut might turn deadly after infection. A fever could spread through servants' quarters within days, and once sickness entered the castle, escaping it became difficult. Imagine walking through the fortress late at night. The corridors are quiet except for distant coughing echoing somewhere beyond the walls. Candles burn low beside closed chamber doors. The air smells stale with smoke and damp cloth. A servant passes carrying a bowl of heated water and herbs toward one of the upper rooms. No one speaks loudly. Inside medieval castles, illness created fear long before anyone understood what caused it. Most people blamed sickness on foul air, divine punishment, bad food, or dangerous weather. Some believed unpleasant smells themselves created disease. In a way, they were partly correct. The castle's filthy conditions often helped illness spread rapidly. Crowded sleeping halls allowed coughs and fevers to pass easily between exhausted workers. Contaminated water carried stomach sickness through kitchens and noble chambers alike. Rats and fleas moved silently through walls and bedding carrying unseen dangers with them. Yet medieval people could not see bacteria or viruses. To them, disease felt mysterious, almost supernatural. During outbreaks, castles changed completely. The normal rhythm of feasting and conversation faded. Doors closed, servants avoided certain corridors. Whispers spread faster than official news. Imagine the Great Hall during one of these uneasy periods. The fireplaces still burn, but fewer people gather near them. Nobles speak quietly beneath candlelight while servants move carefully through the room carrying herbs believed to purify the air. Rosemary hangs beside doorways. Incense drifts through the chamber. Still, coughing continues somewhere in the background. Fear settles over the fortress heavier than smoke. Infections from injuries were especially common. Castle life involved knives, tools, horses, fires, and endless physical labor. Cuts happened constantly. A kitchen servant slicing meat, a stable worker kicked by a horse, a guard injured during training. Without proper antiseptics, wounds easily became swollen, painful, and dangerous. Sometimes a small injury slowly darkened into deadly infection within days. Medical treatment inside castles mixed practical care with superstition. Herbal remedies remained common. Honey covered wounds because people noticed it sometimes helped healing. Warm wine cleaned injuries. Leeches removed blood believed to carry illness. Some treatments offered real benefits accidentally. Others caused greater harm. Physicians serving nobles often possessed education unavailable to ordinary workers, yet even they understood little about germs or sanitation. During severe outbreaks, fear spread rapidly through the castle. Windows opened despite freezing weather, hoping fresh air might drive sickness away. Some nobles isolated themselves in private chambers. Servants burned herbs and incense constantly trying to cleanse the rooms. But crowded conditions made true separation nearly impossible. The poor suffered worst. Servants living closely together had little protection once illness entered the sleeping halls. Exhaustion weakened their bodies. Further, cold, damp rooms, poor nutrition, and endless labor created perfect conditions for sickness to grow. And because castles relied completely on servant labor, disease could cripple daily life quickly. Imagine a winter night deep inside the fortress. Snow falls softly beyond the towers. The halls remain unusually quiet. In one chamber, a sick servant lies beneath rough blankets beside a weak fire. The room smells of smoke, herbs, sweat, and damp cloth. Nearby, another servant replaces cooled water beside the bed while trying not to breathe too deeply. Somewhere beyond the walls, church bells ring faintly through the cold darkness. Inside the castle, everyone waits, not knowing who may fall ill next. Even kings feared disease. Royal blood offered no protection against infection, fever, or plague. Throughout medieval history, powerful nobles died from illnesses modern medicine would treat easily today. A contaminated wound, bad water, a spreading fever inside cold stone walls. The castle's grandeur could not stop sickness once it entered the gates. Tonight, candles continue burning late into the fortress, servants move quietly through the corridors carrying herbs, water, and blankets toward closed chambers. The fireplaces glow low. Outside, winter wind presses against the ancient walls, and somewhere inside the sleeping castle, another cough echoes softly through the darkness, because beneath every banner, feast, and royal ceremony, medieval castles remained fragile places filled with vulnerable human lives. Tomorrow morning, the fortress will awaken again, the fires will burn, the kitchens will work, but invisible dangers will continue drifting silently through the smoky air hidden within the castle itself. And as the cold deepens tonight, another problem slowly grows even worse inside the fortress walls: winter. Winter did not clean the castle, it trapped it. As the cold settled over the land, the fortress changed in ways that were almost invisible at first. Doors stayed shut longer, windows opened less, smoke lingered inside rooms instead of drifting away, and slowly, everything inside the castle began to feel heavier, warmer, and smellier. The stone walls that protected the castle from enemies also protected its odors from escaping. Inside medieval castles, winter was not a season of freshness, it was a season of containment. Imagine the fortress at the beginning of a long winter night. Snow falls gently outside the towers, wind presses against narrow windows. Inside, every fireplace burns constantly, filling corridors with smoke that has nowhere to go. The air becomes thick, not only with warmth, but with everything the castle produces: smoke from wood fires, sweat from crowded sleeping halls, odors from animals, kitchens, and damp clothing, all trapped together beneath low ceilings and closed shutters. In warmer months, at least some of the smell could escape through open windows and courtyards, but winter sealed the castle inward. Even breath itself seemed to stay inside longer. Servants working near fireplaces often felt it first. The heaviness in the air, the slow build-up of warmth and odor that never fully disappeared. In the great hall, winter feasts made the problem worse. Large gatherings brought together dozens, sometimes hundreds of people into enclosed spaces for long hours. Roasting meat filled the hall with rich smoke, hot ale steamed in wooden cups. Wet cloaks hung near fires while snow melted into puddles on the floor, and beneath all of it, the castle smell grew stronger, a mixture of life and confinement. Even sleeping became different in winter. Crowded halls filled completely at night as people sought warmth near shared fireplaces. Blankets stayed on for weeks without proper drying. Clothing absorbed moisture and heat simultaneously. Straw mattresses compressed under constant use, trapping odors deep inside them. At night, the warmth felt comforting, but the air never felt clean. Imagine lying in a crowded sleeping hall during a freezing night. The wind howls faintly through cracks in the stone walls, firelight flickers low and orange across the ceiling beams. Around you, dozens of people sleep breathing the same enclosed air. The smell is not sharp, it is slow: damp wool, smoke, human breath, wood ash, old straw warmed by bodies. Winter did not create new smells, it intensified the ones already there. Servants noticed it most clearly. They spent more time indoors during cold months, moving constantly between kitchens, sleeping halls, and storage rooms filled with smoke and humidity. The air felt harder to breathe. Even animals reacted. Horses in stables produced heavier steam from their bodies in the cold, filling enclosed barns with strong warm scents. Dogs gathered closer to fires inside corridors, adding their own warmth and odor to already crowded spaces. Cats disappeared into storage rooms where grain and warmth attracted mice and rats. Everything inside the castle moved inward during winter, and as life concentrated indoors, so did smell. Water became another challenge. Cold temperatures made washing difficult. Buckets froze, laundry dried slowly or not at all, bathing became rare and uncomfortable, so people delayed cleaning even longer than usual. clothing wore its dirt and smoke deeper into its fabric. By midwinter, even fresh garments quickly absorbed the atmosphere of the castle. There was also less ventilation. Opening windows meant freezing rooms and wasting precious heat, so most remained closed, day after day, night after night. The air grew still. In this stillness, smells lingered far longer than in any other season. Even noble chambers were not spared. Heavy curtains trapped warmth inside royal rooms, but also trapped everything else. Perfumes mixed with smoke and damp fabric until their original scent became unrecognizable. The contrast between appearance and reality grew stronger in winter. From the outside, the castle looked beautiful, snow covering towers, smoke rising gently into cold skies, warm light glowing through narrow windows. But inside, the experience was far more complex. Warmth and discomfort existed together in every room. Tonight, deep within the fortress, a servant quietly opens a narrow shutter for just a moment. Cold air rushes inside immediately. For a brief second, the room feels sharper, cleaner. Then the cold becomes too strong, and the window is closed again. The warmth returns instantly. Along with the smoke, the dampness, and everything else the castle has been holding inside for days. Outside, winter continues falling silently over the towers. Inside, the fortress breathes slowly in and out, holding on to every scent it cannot release, and beneath this frozen stillness, another hidden struggle quietly grows worse with every passing day, the struggle to hide it all. By the time winter deepened, even the wealthiest rooms in the castle could no longer pretend to be untouched by smell. Stone does not forget, wood does not forget, and neither does fabric soaked for years in smoke, dampness, and the invisible weight of daily life inside the fortress. But nobles still tried. In fact, they tried harder than anyone else, because in medieval castles, appearance mattered almost as much as survival, and smell threatened both. Imagine stepping into a noble chamber just before a royal gathering. Servants move quickly but carefully through the room. Heavy curtains are shaken and rehung. Fresh rushes are scattered across the floor. Candles are replaced one by one, their flames steady and warm. Everything looks prepared, but the real work is something less visible, something designed to hide what cannot be removed. Perfume. In the medieval world, scent became a tool of status. Rich nobles used fragrance the way they used gold embroidery or fine fabrics, not to eliminate odors, but to cover them. Rosewater was sprayed across rooms. Lavender bundles were tucked into bedding. Herbs were burned slowly in small bowls placed near fireplaces. The air changed, but only on the surface. Beneath it, the castle remained the same. Smoke still lived in the walls. Dampness still clung to the stone. Old fabrics still carried the memory of years of use. But for a short time, guests could be convinced otherwise. Imagine a grand feast about to begin. The great hall is transformed. Long tables shine under candlelight. Silver cups reflect flickering flames. Musicians prepare quietly in a corner. And above all of it, the scent of burning herbs drifts gently through the air. It is a carefully constructed illusion. Even the most powerful nobles understood they could not fully control the castle environment, so they focused on control of perception instead. Scented cloths were held near the nose during unpleasant moments. Perfume bottles were carried in ornate containers. Even gloves were sometimes stuffed with fragrant flowers. Visitors arriving from outside might believe they were entering a place of refinement, at least for a while, but castles were too large and too complex to fully mask. Servants knew this better than anyone. They worked behind the scenes preparing every surface before noble guests arrived. Scrubbing tables, sweeping floors, hiding waste, covering stains with fresh rushes and cloth, and always burning something to change the smell of the air. Smoke from herbs mixed with smoke from fireplaces, creating a layered scent that felt intentional, almost ceremonial. but when the fires died down, the truth returned. The castle always returned. Even royal bedrooms were treated this way. Before sleep, servants would air out chambers briefly if weather allowed. Perfumed water would be sprinkled across fabrics. Fresh linen might replace older bedding during important occasions. Yet the underlying smells never fully disappeared. They simply became quieter for a time. Like echoes beneath stronger sounds, in some cases, nobles traveled with their own scented supplies, small pouches of herbs stitched into clothing, perfumed oils carried from distant regions, rare spices burned during personal rituals. These fragrances were expensive and carefully chosen. They represented not just comfort, but identity. A noble household could be recognized by its preferred scents just as much as its banners or colors. Still, the castle itself resisted all attempts at permanent transformation. Because the source of the smell was not in one place, it was everywhere, in walls, in floors, in fabric, in water, in air that never fully left the rooms. Imagine standing in a quiet corridor after a feast has ended. The great hall is empty now. Candles burn low. Tables have been cleared. Only faint traces of perfume remain in the air. But beneath it, something older persists. Smoke from the fires, sweat from the gathering. The dampness of winter clothing drying too close to heat. The castle remembers everything, even attempts to forget. Servants often joked quietly among themselves that perfume was not cleaning, but painting the air. A temporary color placed over something permanent. And yet, without it, noble life would have been far more uncomfortable. So the rituals continued, again and again. Each gathering refreshed the illusion, each cleaning prepared the stage, each scent layered over another, until the castle became a complicated mixture of reality and disguise. Tonight, deep within the fortress, a noble chamber is prepared for sleep. A servant gently places lavender near the bed while another adjusts heavy curtains. A final bowl of rosewater is set beside the fireplace. The room feels softer now, warmer, almost peaceful, but outside the chamber doors, the corridor tells a different story. Smoke still clings to stone, damp air still moves through cracks. And the castle continues breathing its slow, imperfect breath, because no matter how carefully it is hidden, the truth of the fortress is always just one closed door away. And tomorrow, when the fires rise again and the halls fill once more, the struggle to maintain that illusion will begin all over again. The castle grows quiet again, not because it has become peaceful, but because it has simply run out of energy for noise. Firelight fades into slow embers, candles shrink into trembling points of light. Even the wind outside the towers feels softer now, as if it is tired of pushing against the ancient stone. Inside the fortress, night finally takes full control. This is the moment when everything the castle holds begins to settle. Smoke that filled the halls during the day now hangs low. And still, damp air clings to stone and fabric without moving. The smell of life, labor, and survival becomes part of the silence itself, and somewhere inside this vast structure, people fall asleep in layers of comfort and discomfort mixed together. Medieval sleep was never simple. It was shaped by noise, smell, temperature, and uncertainty. In one corner of the castle, nobles lie beneath thick curtains in warm chambers lit by dying fireplaces. In another, servants sleep shoulder to shoulder in crowded halls where breath and warmth are shared between strangers. Below them, kitchens sit dark and silent, still faintly smelling of yesterday's fires. And beyond the walls, animals settle into stables filled with steam and hay. The entire castle sleeps. But nothing is truly still. Imagine drifting into sleep inside this world. The last candle in your chamber flickers softly. The bed is warm, but the air carries the memory of smoke and herbs burned earlier to freshen the room. Outside the curtains, the castle breathes slowly. Wood creaks in the cold, stone holds onto winter's dampness. Far away, a dog shifts in its sleep near a corridor fire. Sleep arrives differently here, not as silence, but as layers, layer upon layer of sound, scent, warmth, and history all resting together inside stone walls built centuries ago. Even dreams in such a place might feel different. Not modern and quiet, but shaped by the castle itself, halls that stretch endlessly in memory, corridors that twist between light and shadow, doors that open into rooms filled with firelight, smoke, and distant voices, and always the sense of being inside something enormous, something alive in its own slow way. As the night deepens, the castle begins its final transformation, not into beauty, not into horror, but into stillness. Servants who remained awake finally lie down in exhausted sleep, guards lean against cold walls, half dreaming beneath helmets and cloaks. Even the smallest sounds, footsteps, whispers, dripping water, fade into the background of night. Only the castle remains fully awake, holding everything inside itself: smoke in its ceilings, dampness in its walls, stories in its stone, and people scattered throughout its chambers. Sleeping through it all, there is something strange about a medieval castle at night. It feels both crowded and empty at the same time. Crowded with lives sleeping in every corner, empty because darkness hides them all beneath one shared silence, and in that silence, time feels slower, almost suspended, as if the castle itself is remembering every day it has ever witnessed, every feast, every winter, every moment of labor and exhaustion. Every breath taken inside its walls. Now, all of it rests together. Tonight, the final fire in the great hall sinks into glowing ash. A servant turns once in sleep near a dying ember. A noble adjusts a curtain without waking. Outside, snow or rain continues falling gently beyond the towers. The world beyond the castle keeps moving, but inside, everything pauses, and for a brief moment, it almost feels like peace. Not because the castle is clean, not because it is comfortable, not because it is free from smell or hardship, but because everything inside it has finally stopped trying to change. And so, in that quiet hour between night and dawn, the medieval castle becomes what it always was beneath everything else: a place where people lived, a place where people endured, a place where people slept. And now, as the last traces of firelight fade into darkness, the fortress settles fully into night. Good night.